Hi everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder how your brain handles talking to a group of people, especially when they might not all be on the same page? Well, this new study dives deep into that very question, especially for people who have had a traumatic brain injury. This paper is all about something scientists call multi-party audience design. Basically, it is our amazing ability to change how we talk when we're speaking to more than one person, and especially when those people know different things. You know, like when you are telling a story to your friends and one friend missed the beginning, so you have to fill them in without boring the friend who heard it all already. It's super complicated, but we do it almost without thinking. But what happens when someone has a traumatic brain injury, or TBI, does it mess with this important social skill? That's what these researchers wanted to find out. They noticed that people with TBI often have trouble with social communication. So they decided to look closely at how these individuals handle talking in groups where not everyone has the same information. Think about it. Being in a meeting at work, a family dinner, or even just chatting with friends can feel like a juggling act when everyone has their own background knowledge. So how did they test this? They gathered 30 adults who had experienced a moderate to severe traumatic brain injury and compared them to 30 people who hadn't. They played a game called a referential communication game. Imagine you are the director and you have to describe pictures to two matchers who are trying to put those pictures in the same order as you. First, in what they call the sorting phase, the director and the matchers played for several rounds. The goal was for the director to describe abstract images, and over time everyone would start to use the same words or labels for those images. This is how they built up what scientists call common ground, which is just shared understanding. Then came the test phase. Here, the director, our participant, described the images again, but this time, the surprise was that the two matchers could have different levels of knowledge. Sometimes, both matchers had learned the labels during the sorting phase, so they were knowledgeable. Other times, both matchers were new or naive and didn't know the labels. And sometimes, it was a mix, one knowledgeable and one naive. This setup allowed the researchers to see if the director adapted their speech based on who was listening. They looked at three main things in the director's speech: how long their descriptions were expression length, if they used words like "the" versus a definite reference, and if they paused or repeated words, disfluency. These are all clues about how much effort or planning the speaker is doing. Now, for the findings, in the sorting phase, both groups got better at describing the images over time, which is what you'd expect. But the participants with TBI didn't improve as much as the non-injured group. It was like they weren't learning the shared labels as efficiently. The real action happened in the test phase. When talking to groups of listeners with at least one person who didn't know the labels, both groups did change their speech to be clearer. They spoke longer, stumbled more, and used less definite language, which are all signs they were trying to be more understandable. That makes sense, right? You talk longer and maybe more carefully if someone didn't know what you were talking about. However, here is the key finding. The people with TBI didn't adjust their speech as much as the non-injured group. Their adaptations were smaller, weaker. So, what does this all mean? The study concludes that people with moderate to severe TBI struggle to adapt their spoken language when talking in groups where people have different levels of knowledge. This difficulty could make everyday conversations in places like work, school, or even just with family and friends much harder. Imagine not being able to fine-tune your message for different people in a group. It could lead to misunderstandings and communication breakdowns. This research is so important because multi-party communication is literally everywhere. We're not just having one-on-one chats all day. We're in meetings, we're with our families, we're in classrooms, and our brain's ability to adjust our language on the fly for different listeners is a really complex skill. The researchers highlight previous work showing how people without brain injuries can juggle multiple perspectives, adjusting their language for each person, or even for the group as a whole, often by speaking to the needs of the least knowledgeable person. Studies like the ones by Yoon and Brown-Schmidt mentioned here have shown that even when people are asked to speak to two listeners with different knowledge levels simultaneously, they can adapt. They might use shorter phrases for the knowledgeable listener and longer, more detailed ones for the person who is new to the topic. They might even aim low, meaning they tailor their message to the person who knows the least to make sure everyone can follow along. Now, why is TBI such a big deal for this? The paper explains that TBI can affect many cognitive processes that are crucial for this kind of audience design. Things like attention, the ability to understand another person's viewpoint, and memory are all often impacted by TBI when these basic building blocks of communication are impaired. It makes sense that the more complex skill of multi-party audience design would also suffer. We already know that in simpler conversations or dyads between two people, TBI can cause problems like people not speaking as much, saying things that don't quite fit, or having trouble keeping conversations going. But this study goes a step further, looking at the more complex group setting and suggesting that some of these issues might stem from a failure in this common ground and audience design process. If you can't easily track who knows what, your contributions might sound off because they're not tailored correctly. This study's main goal was to see if this multi-party audience design skill is indeed disrupted after TBI. Their hypothesis was straightforward. TBI makes it harder to keep track of what different people know and to adjust your language accordingly. During the sorting phase, they expected everyone to get more efficient as they learned the labels for the images. Shorter sentences, more confident use of words like the, and fewer stumbles. And that is exactly what they saw. In the test phase, they predicted that when faced with someone new, both groups would adapt by speaking longer, being less definite, and having more pauses or stumbles. They expected the TBI group to do this, but less so than the control group, meaning their adaptations would be smaller. Looking at figure 2, we can see how things changed across the 4 rounds of sorting. You can see that generally, both groups started talking less and being more fluent as they got used to describing the images. But that improvement, that gain in efficiency, was smaller for the TBI group. They weren't quite catching up as fast to the non-injured folks. And in figure 3, we see the test phase results. When both listeners knew the image labels, both groups spoke similarly. But as soon as there was 1 or 2 listeners who were naive, meaning they didn't know the labels, the non-injured group really ramped up their adaptations. They spoke longer, had more disfluencies, and were less definite. The TBI group also adapted, but as the graph shows, their bars are significantly shorter than the non-injured groups. They did adapt, but not as much. The discussion section really hammers home what these results mean. The researchers explained that the TBI group showed weaker improvements in learning shared labels during the sorting phase, suggesting a problem in forming that common ground. Then, in the test phase, while they did show some adaptation when talking to less knowledgeable listeners, the magnitude was significantly smaller. This points to a reduced ability to notice and respond to the different knowledge levels of multiple people. They suggest that these disruptions in building shared understanding and adapting language for different listeners could put people with TBI at a disadvantage in many real-life situations. Think about trying to have a conversation where you are constantly under-explaining to some people and over-explaining to others, or just not providing the right information because you can't quite gauge your audience properly. This study is exciting because it shows that studying these complex group interactions in a lab setting is possible, and can reveal important insights that might be missed in simpler, one-on-one studies. It offers a new way to understand why people with TBI sometimes struggle in social settings and could lead to better ways to help them. Clinically, this could inform how we train communication partners. Maybe partners need to be more aware that longer, less definite, or more disfluent speech from someone with TBI isn't necessarily a sign of disinterest, but a sign of them struggling to adapt. It also highlights the need for better clinical tests that specifically assess multi-party communication challenges. The researchers also point out some important areas for future work. They mention that while they only looked at spoken language, gesture, and eye gaze also play a big role in communication, and the companion paper they reference explores this. They also emphasize the need to explore the underlying cognitive reasons for these disruptions like memory, attention, and perspective taking, and how they interact. They are particularly interested in how memory plays a role, as remembering who knows what over time is crucial. They also mention that TBI is very diverse, and future studies could look at individual differences to better predict who might struggle most with multi-party communication. It is clear that this research opens up a whole new avenue for understanding and helping individuals with TBI navigate our complex social world. By focusing on these everyday communication challenges, we can hopefully develop more effective interventions and improve the quality of life for people living with brain injuries. So, what's my take on this research? It is a really well-designed study that tackles a crucial, yet often overlooked aspect of communication after TBI. The methods are sound and the findings are significant. They've shown that while people with TBI can adapt their speech in groups, they don't do it as flexibly or as strongly as people without TBI. This is a crucial insight because it means that these difficulties aren't just abstract concepts. They have real-world consequences for social interaction, work, and education. One of the strengths is definitely the use of a controlled experiment that mimics a real-world social scenario. This allows for precise measurement of communication behaviors that might be hard to capture in naturalistic settings. However, as the authors acknowledge, It is still a lab setting. Future research could explore how these findings play out in more spontaneous, longer-term interactions, perhaps involving familiar communication partners instead of trained research assistants. Also, digging deeper into which specific cognitive functions, beyond memory, are most strongly linked to these deficits would be incredibly valuable for targeted interventions. Ultimately, this study is a powerful reminder of how complex social communication is and how interconnected our cognitive abilities are. It offers hope for better assessment and intervention strategies for people with TBI, moving beyond just describing the problems to understanding the underlying mechanisms. What are your thoughts on this? Do you have experiences with multi-party communication that have felt challenging? Let us know in the comments below, and if you found this breakdown helpful, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more science explained, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next exploration into the fascinating world of psychology and the human mind. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.